All right, guys. So this is going to address directly the lab assignment for this week. So your first part, right, is to run the direct sunlight hours analysis for a full year on your studio design massing model. So I replicated some of that essentially, right? So this is the top XY. This is facing north, right? And this is the site where the slope. Some of this information is optional, right? Like if you have it, great. Sometimes it can make the diagram look better. And then a massing model, right? And you'll notice that ideally, right, this is simple massing, no windows, right? No kind of weird projections, and don't get too granular with it. It'll just make the kind of like sort of simulation calculation take long, maybe much longer. And then ideally Boolean union them all together into one single poly surface like this. Okay. All right. So to begin with, we will have, of course, navigate to Ladybug import EPW, right? And search for path, uh, file path, and right click, select one existing file, and go to wherever you saved your EPW file, in this case here, Detroit, to link that in and put it into the EPW file, right? Now, again, I always can do a sanity check, so you can double slash, put in a panel to look at the location, right? So you'll get the location data here, okay? So part of this analysis, we'll always have to do uh, construct sky matrix. So LB sky, cumulative sky matrix. Right now, I'm not going to bother inputting anything in the north direction because I know my model, right, is located correctly. So location goes into here. Um, direct normal radiation, diffuse horizontal goes in diffuse, right? And then we need a LB analysis period, second one, analysis period, right? This, right? So start month 1 to 12, just make sliders that correlate to these number ranges. So 1 to 12, slider 1 smaller than 12. Start day 1 to 31, right? Slider 1 smaller than 31. And then start hour 0 to 23, right? So slider 0 smaller than 23. Um, Control C, Control V, right? Do a second set. So of course the first set goes here, correlates, and month. Second set and month, day, uh, hour, right? Now time step in our increments, so I would just do a panel double slash one for the time step, and that's it. Okay. Um, for the full year, of course, these end month, end day, end hour essentially gets dragged to the very end. So that's analyzing the entire year, right? Hour years goes to hour years. So as soon as I drag that in, it'll freeze for a second because it's kind of calculating things. Really don't need anything else from here. Okay. Then direct, oh sorry, always start with LB direct. So LB direct sun hours. Okay. Let's take a look. Oh, we will also need the sun path. So LB sun path. LB sun path, this guy. Okay. Same thing, right? I'll leave north empty, right? But of course, if your north isn't up, then you need to update that, right? So location comes from location, right? HOY's always comes from here, right? And then you'll see the kind of thing pop in right away. Let's see, what else? We can skip daylight saving, solar time. So center point. I would actually kind of designate a center point. So some of the ways I would do this is I'll hide this for a second. Um, is actually kind of like, for example, select your site model, site extents, right? If you essentially run a bounding box on it, right? And then you can kind of see in the bottom, if you drew a cross or drew a line, so drew a polyline, crossing it like that, its intersection is the midpoint, right? I already have a point there because I did it earlier. Or midpoint of that line essentially is kind of like the center, right? So this is kind of where I would put, the point for the center point, right? So let's bring in a point. So double click, point. So this point container, right? Set one point, set it to that, right? And so that'll use that as a midpoint. Center point, we can delete the bounding box, get it out of the way. So this goes into center point, right? Control Q, bring that back. So there you go, right? Now the scale, of course, let's do a slider 0 smaller than 3.0. This kind of controls the size of that diagram, right? So 0.9 makes it larger or smaller. This is just so that eventually we can have some flexibility to control that. Okay, let's see. For now, I don't think we really need anything else in material element unless we really want to. Okay, so here, sun path vectors goes into vectors, right? Time step comes from way over here, number one, this one, so time step's the same, right? And then we need to link in our geometry and context. So these are simple geometry containers. Actually, let me just search for it. Geo, search geometry, right? Get two of them. Make one, right? Design geo. The other one, right? Site geo, right? So design geo, right click, set one, ideally, and then it's this, right? Your massing model. And then site geo is the base, right? So set one, link that in. Okay, we can hide those. We're not going to change that much. Design geo goes into geometry. Uh, Context goes into there. Okay. Uh, Okay, so these are linked in. I would be very careful with this grid size part, right? So you should check your units, right? So in this case, my units here in this file are in inches, right? Um, if you're in feet, then the values we use for these, you can kind of divide by 10 or 12, right? But because mine is in inches, feet, then or overall in inches, these like values, some of the values we use are going to be much larger. So, but it's also just like generally better to like start really large and then go smaller. Otherwise, if you have a value that's too small, it can just like take a long time to calculate and it might seem like your computer crashed. Okay. So I am actually going to start with like 1,000 first, and then we can adjust down, right? So this is kind of the grid size, right? We can adjust down as we go. Offset distance just creates a little bit of offset for the analysis mesh once it's done, offset off of your geometry. Usually this is a pretty small number and you just like keep it there. So 0.1, it might be 1 inch, right? For example, for the inches file, but usually it's a kind of very small number. That way, sometimes you don't even have to like hide your, original volume when you're kind of exporting things. Okay. Uh, we don't need any of this unless you want to modify the legend, and then we have a Boolean toggle for the run. So it's false by default. and we can toggle it and you run. So this popped in right away, which tells me that especially in this case, you can kind of tell my grid size is really large, right? And again, if you're not seeing the kind of display, so display preview mesh edges basically kind of hides and shows that. So let's bring this down to 100. Say okay. It'll take a moment to recalculate. So that's basically 100 by 100 inches, right? That's the grid size. And you'll see a little bit that kind of overlap. And you can kind of play with this offset number. If you say 1, sometimes it works, sometimes maybe sometimes the offset number needs to get like much larger for it to be, let's say, offset far enough so you don't get this kind of weird, overlapping occlusion. But usually, again, I just kind of find it easier just to like, okay, let's just hide the design geometry in the Rhino file and just like not have to mess with this too much, right? So revert that back to 0.1. And so this actually can probably be 30, at least for this scale, for this unit's size and scale and size of the building. So it will take a little longer to calculate as I'm waiting a couple moments. Okay, so that's a kind of seems like a reasonable, right, analysis grid scale for a building this size, right? Okay, so that's that. Basically, this is your output, right? You might want to hide, so Control Q, kind of hide the sun path part, right? But sometimes, like for something like this, it's actually nice to have the compass, right? I don't have it in this particular image, but it might actually be nice to have the compass in the display. So what we can do is just bring the compass in, use a sun path, use a custom color preview. So preview, custom preview, right? Color swatch, so type swatch, color swatch. I would just do black, right? So click on the white part, drag RGB to 0, accept, that's black, right? And then drag the compass here. You get the compass ring around it. Now, of course, it's not to scale, so we can kind of make the ring a little bit smaller by scaling this thing down. Um, Taking a moment to run. 0.5 is actually probably too small. I would actually explicitly set it to like 0.7 or something. So this is 0.5. Yeah, that's might just fit, right? So you can kind of get the compass in there. Okay, let's see. So for the export, right? For the sort of export display, um, some of these again, right, you can kind of pull out and bake and stuff like that. For now, I think we can leave it unless you want to change the color of the output mesh, right? So you can kind of do the same thing, bring the preview over, Control C, Control V, right? Pull the mesh over, right? And what that does is that even if I hide the original, right? So the original will have like the red kind of mesh display outline with a red kind of color, which is kind of default display for mesh edges. This just makes colors that black, right? And then you can kind of hide the original, sorry, the direct sun hours, bring the preview back. So the preview will give you black mesh edges and your kind of colored mesh display. Of course, you can change this using the swatch, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So that's kind of it, I believe. Yeah. All right, so let's work on the kind of output, right, for this particular portion. we have this sort of compass rose roughly the right size. Um, there is a legend for this, right? Which is kind of like half embedded. So we'll probably need to bring it up. I think it's kind of like underneath, right? So if you bring the legend out, right, and actually maybe the title too. So hold shift, right, into the move, then you'll see it kind of pop up over there, right? This obviously eventually will kind of depend on like where you want to kind of frame this view. Is it this corner? And then you'll see it there. If it's this corner, it might be inverted, so you have to like flip it around, right? All this sort of stuff, right? But first we want to kind of move it out of the ground. So we'll use a unit Z vector. So search unit Z and do a slider 0 smaller than 300, let's say. That should give us enough clearance, right? So I'm bringing it in kind of like out of the ground, right? So if I was doing, oops, sorry. If I was doing a screenshot, try to select the entire thing. If I was trying to do a screenshot from, let's say, this corner, right, then that might be enough. It's still a little close, right, or tight. So my inclination would be kind of like to try to move it, right, further out, away, right? So in this case, again, you can kind of take those and just do another move. So you can take this, copy the entire block, change the vector to, let's say, unit Y. So unit Y, replace that, right, which can then start to kind of like, oh, actually probably unit, oh, sorry, go from here to here, right, the geometry, X, so sorry, unit X, it should be unit X, blah, blah, right, hide the original, right, so this can kind of move it out depending on how far out you want to move this, right? And if you want to move it down, then it just unit Y, again, Control C, Control V, and just daisy chain it, right? So G, G for all this, right, going out. Kind of hide the previous one. And this just kind of gives you a bit more control. And you, of course, replace this with Y. So you basically kind of get control of X, Y, Z. Now this, if you want to move down, then it actually might have to go in the negative, right? So this can double click, change the minimum to minus 300. So this slider starts to move it this way. This looks like it might need a little bit more. So I'll make this 500 and just kind of float it a little bit, right? So we can kind of see that. Okay, now if you needed to rotate it to the other side, you can rotate it, right? Just use a rotate around axis and use the center point, right? So it gets flipped to that direction. So, but this is kind of like what you would sort of get. It makes a lot of sense, right? Let's actually just rotate it. Rotate object in the plane, GAP, so G axis should be, this is the rotation angle, this should be XY plane, right? So geometry, uh, rotation angle, right click, degrees, and then 0 smaller than 180. There, right? I can use this world XY, but you'll see here, let's spin this out, right? It kind of goes out of the way, right? So again, I actually want to use this sort of center, right? So that point that we had earlier, this point, right? That was the center point is actually also the rotation center for this. So I will use that point into here. So these inputs, right, I tend to highlight them right? Just so I can find them a little easier, right? So in this case, then if we're trying to look at it from this direction, then this is rotating. I can kind of adjust its location this way a little bit as well as height a little bit more, make sure it's not, blocking anything essentially, right? And so these are just kind of sequence of moves, like both in the Z, X, and Y, right? All three of them, right, to get it into the right place. Okay, so that looks good. I'm going to change to my monochrome view, right, which should look like this. And then for this, probably turn off the shadow. So I'm going to display options, right click, display options over here, expand my monochrome, shadows, and unclick shadows. Right, you can decide, I don't think there are any hidden lines really, whether or not you want silhouettes or not, etc. Say okay. And then set view, isometric. So in this case, this is probably northeast or northwest, right? I just have a tendency to select everything and kind of zoom select to zoom it in, right? So I know that's kind of as close as you can get. You can kind of pan it a little bit just to frame it a little better. And then just view capture to file. All right, this sort of screenshot, viewport resolution is fine for me. Say okay, and just save that somewhere, right? Okay, so that's that. That's one, right? And of course, the other one, you can kind of choose a different isometric view. So like northeast, for example, zoom select. Oop, I accidentally moved it. So try again, set view, northeast, right? Zoom select, pan, and kind of right view capture that. Okay, so that's the first one, right? This is the sun hours, direct sun hours. Okay. All right, second one, we already have the sun path diagram, but we just need to kind of modify this a little bit to get this exactly. So let's go back. So assuming, kind of all of that is done, you can kind of hide all this sort of stuff. Hide your sort of previews and these things, right? The things that are not part of this, right? If you want, can group these to make it a little bit easier to manage. So we're bringing back the sun path, right, sort of diagram. And then in this particular example, right, I'm kind of trying to isolate like one particular day, right? So in order to do that, so you'll want to maybe probably like keep this group, sun path diagram group, kind of associated with your direct sun hours, right? And just kind of like not change it. That includes this analysis period group. Okay. So what we're going to do is actually just like select copy, Control C, Control V, right? Essentially like one entire new group to work with and just like hide all of those original ones. Okay. The point's still here, right? So it's still referenced to the same kind of center point. I mean, you can kind of pull it down from there if you want. It's kind of the same thing, right? And then as well as copy paste this analysis period down here, right? So this is the second part of the assignment. I'm doing this just so that I can easily not have to go move these things back and forth, right? So I think in the assignment, right, summer solstice, winter solstice, right? Scale the diagram, it's already kind of semi-scaled, right? So for this, because it's one day, so we actually don't need all these redundant, right, kind of like numbers, sliders. We can delete those, right? Start day and end day are the same, right? Start month and end month are the same, okay? And then it's actually just like changing the hours of the day. So basically, for this analysis period, we're just looking at one single day of the year, right? which in this case would be 6, 20 or 21, right? And the entire day 0 to 23. Okay. So this analysis period kind of goes in. We're just going to replace the hour of the year input over there. Okay. And that's that. One thing here, so this will need a Boolean toggle. So Boolean toggle goes into the daily and then toggle it to true, which then sets this to a kind of 1 day. I think 0.6 cuts it a little, 0.5 for the scale cuts it pretty close, so I'll do 0.6 maybe just to give it a little bit of room, right? So you'll get something that looks a bit more like that, right? You'll see, of course, my design geometry is hidden now, so I'll show, right, to kind of bring it back so I can see the design project in there. Then the rest of that we can kind of leave. Okay. So the other thing is to kind of draw the lines, right, from the sun and all that sort of stuff. So our sun points, here's a list, right? 16 points representing the location of the sun on the sun path. We'll do a mesh sphere, right? It looks like that. This is the base plane radius, right? So sun points to the B. And it's going to be really small at first because these are in inch units. So actually, let me delete this group so it's not in the way. The R radius is 10 inches, so we might have to do something much larger. So let's say 3, 4, 5 feet, 60 inches. Make it bigger, right? 60 inches. And then to color it, we use a mesh spray. So it's like a spray paint can. That goes in there. The points just needs a 0, 0. So double slash 0, comma 0, comma 0. That goes into points. Oop. That goes into points. And then the color is a swatch. Color swatch, which we can set to orangey color. Accept, right? So that will take that. You'll have the mesh outline, mesh edge display. So for this particular version or this particular output, I actually would turn this off, right? So you don't get those outlines. It looks a little nicer this way, and you get the colors. Okay. So compass. Let's see. All right. Finally, we are going to want to draw the vectors, right? And so these are the output vectors from those lines, okay? And we can, let's see, line, start point, tangent, length, so line SDL. We don't use this actually that much, but so start point would actually be coming from the sun points. The tangent direction comes from vectors, and you'll see they're very short, right? So we'll actually eventually need a line length or a line length multiplier here. And this usually actually is a little bit linked to the scene scale. It corresponds to a radius of 100 meters, basically, in the Rhino system. So this is essentially like 60 meters or about 180 feet, right? Now, we can kind of do a little bit of math. So multiplication using the asterisk or the star, right? So this scale, and we just give it a fixed number, which should be something around 300, if I'm not mistaken. This goes into the line length. Oh, okay, so that's a lot longer. So this is probably 4,400, let's see. right? Now they'll actually overshoot a little bit, right? I'm not kind of approximating this. You can probably like really dial it in if you do like the meters to feet or to inches kind of conversion, but we're not going to see it anyways. So it's going to overshoot. So probably that, right? Now I do this just so you can actually just like give it a value explicitly. I do this just so like the scaling factor will right kind of scale with it. If I make it bigger, the line's still long enough, right, for us to see, right? Now that line again, I would do a custom preview, Control C, Control V, move this into there, hide the line, Control Q. And then I like to use something more purplish or magenta E for this. Accept. Right, so we get right the kind of sun incident angles in this magenta or purple. Okay, so that's kind of that. Um, and you can do a whole day, you can do slightly less, but I think this is kind of just kind of represents the entire kind of relationship with the sun angles. And I believe these are, yeah, these are also essentially axonometric. So I think that's everything. You don't really want the shadows in this one either. And we already have the compass, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, let's see. Let me see what the title. Uh, so that's just that line. Okay, so if we want to, we can kind of hide the original SunPath sort of diagram. And then just for the preview, you can add the daily lines, right? So hold down Shift, add that into the preview so you get that arc. In particular, if you want the title back, just bring back the title. Again, holding down Shift, the title will come back in and or the legend. Although I don't think the legend actually has, yeah, the legend doesn't have any output in here. And I think that's actually kind of it for this. Okay, so same thing, right? Set view, isometric. In of course, you can kind of pick which sort of views are a bit more kind of informative. Zoom select. I'll kind of zoom in and sort of right pan a little bit, just kind of frame it a little bit better. And view capture to file. Now, what you usually find, I think, with these kind of isometric views is like sometimes the angle just kind of right maybe coincides with the sun angle a little bit too much, right? I mean, because we're doing kind of winter, summer, solstice kind of comparisons, I would probably say like you can kind of keep the view the same, right? But just change the date range, right? So now let's look at winter, right? So in this case, let's drag it 12, 21, right? And then so winter is actually kind of way down here. So that probably, right, is a case where like you're looking at it and say, okay, I probably want my scene scale to be a bit bigger so it doesn't look like the sun's kind of like coming from the ground, right? So you can, that's kind of a case where this probably can be, I don't know, let's try 0.8 and see. It's still very low, right? So, but that's the case, right? Unless another way is actually just kind of say, well, let's kind of maybe move the point a little bit. It will recalculate. It will kind of affect certain things in the scene. So right, this thing will kind of recalculate, especially if we still have some of the radiation stuff up there, just so that like this isn't kind of coming from such an awkward place. But that's fine. It's not a kind of like huge issue here. Okay, so that's those. You can see the example I posted is kind of like much larger, right? That's probably scale 0.8 or 0.9. Okay. Finally, some path diagram and shadow studies. So this is done usually kind of for the most part from the top view, right? So this view, okay? And we will bring in, so this is the second part, right? So that's done, right? We will bring in a analysis. So again, LB analysis period. Oh no, not this one. Uh, where is it? It's, apply? No, forgot. Which one was it? Let's see. This guy is called, oh, calculate HOY. It'll be calculate HOY. So, and then this one, LB capture view. Forgot the name. Here we go. Okay, so LB calculate HOY. So this is, again, this is specific one date or one time during the day, right? You can kind of copy these guys from above, month, day, and hour. Again, in this case, ignore the minute. We didn't set things up to calculate to the minute there, right? And then LB sun. So set Rhino sun, this. North is the same. Location comes from way, way, way up here. Location, right? Which is Detroit. North, we can just leave empty because we know our or justification is correct. HOY goes into here. And then Boolean toggle for the run. Okay. And then you set this to true. In this case, I need to turn my shadows back on, right? So go to display options, monochrome, shadows on. These are generally my settings, like so maximum, lowest, no soft edge quality, no edge blurring, cleaner artifacts. I haven't found this to actually make that much of a change, right? So if you need to look at it, of course, shadow intensity can, I would start stronger, but if you kind of find it more overbearing, then do something like 80%. Okay. And sometimes you have to like toggle it really quickly. Let me see what we are getting. Top view. Okay, so I would, oh, because my hour, right? So here, let's say 8 a.m., right? 6:21. That's summer solstice, 8 a.m. Now, for the assignment, you can choose any day. It really doesn't matter, right? So any specific day from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. I'm going to change this to 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. with 2 hour intervals. So you need to do less. It doesn't have to be this dense. Let's see. 8 a.m., right? We can kind of pick whatever, maybe August 21st instead, right? So you can do these as individual screenshots. right? Otherwise, Ladybug does have this capture view component, right, which we were kind of using earlier. File name, so double slash, right, shadow study underscore, right? I'll do something like this, which I'll use, and then I'll use a concat, the search concatenate. Shadow study will go in the front into the A input. What this does is kind of appends whatever text comes in. So this is the hour, right? So this will concatenate, say, shadow study underscore 8, right? And so for each hour, it will change the file name. So that goes into that. We'll need to direct a file path. So file path, give it a file path into the folder. This tells it where to save things. You can kind of also do this at the end. So that just gives us a little bit of a status readout, let's say. Right click, right, select a directory on the file path. You'll see I already had some things, but let's just make a new one. Shadow test 2, right? And select folder, right? So it sets the export file path to there, right? View name. So this, I have discovered that if you have duplicates, right? If I have two tops open, it will pick one over the other. Just make sure your other active viewpoints aren't the same, but I know, okay, I am going to use the top. You kind of want to like frame it right correctly, frame it, center it, and this sort of stuff. And this is literally, you can say top, perspective, bottom, left, right. So double click top, double slash, right? That's the view name. Leave all this as default, unless you want to determine, resolutions explicitly. Otherwise, you're just going to use your viewport dimensions, display mode as well. So this should be no text. Default will be the display mode of the active viewport, right? So what we see right now, essentially, right? So Rachel, okay, and this is a button. So double click button. So this is the same as a true false toggle, except momentarily when you activate the button. So that's kind of it. Let's check. I don't know if we want all this, right? So in this case, let's hide our previews from above. So Control Q and maybe I do want the compass. So let's just copy paste, bring it back, and then let's just disconnect all for now. We just want the compass back in. Maybe if you want, you can bring the daily or the right. Basically, you can kind of decide if you want some of these things and the sun kind of in there, right? Just to kind of give some reference. But I actually think we should just do compass, right? And in that way, you can also kind of scale it down, get it to fit better, right? All this kind of stuff. And my cat wants to be in the video. There you go. So say hi, Yuki. Okay, I think that's kind of it. All right. So in this case, just to kind of fulfill the assignment, what you do is like you start with 8 a.m. here, right? Click. Oh, did I have an error? Let's see. I did have an error. Get view list. What did I do wrong? Let's see. Top. Oh, this is old. Let me see. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, sorry. Okay, my bad. This is the old version. Didn't notice. I think everything else is kind of the same. So we just replace all the inputs. So let's see. File name goes here. Folder goes here. Viewport is top. right? And then with height mode is the render mode, right? So should be default, and then captures down here. Let's do that. Okay, that hopefully will work. The reason I saw is that when I click the button, you'll see it flash red, right? So if I click the button and this pops up, then it should be correct. So here's my first shadow test 2, right? So that's 8. So that's good, right? So literally what you do, 8, let's say every 2 hours. So 10, click it, click the button, noon, so 12, click the button, 2 p.m., 4 p.m., and 6 p.m. There you go. So 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, right? So those. All right. So those are your outputs. If you look at it, it should look like this, right? And we're just going to throw it into Adobe Photoshop, sort of as a sequence, and kind of overlay them. And that's kind of it. So all the grasshopper stuff and rhino stuff is done. This is kind of the third, right, kind of section. So 1, 2, 3, all kind of built off the same kind of succession of things. Go into Photoshop. And just dump them all in. And you can probably use like the 8 a.m. one as the base, right? So you don't need to change anything there. I would start, well, drag it into the right sequence. Start with 10, Control A, V, move it over, right? We're basically kind of dragging and dropping it over, and not now. Yes. Zoom out a little, right? Oftentimes I will just do a multiply, and then you can just make sure it snaps correctly, right? And then just close it as you go so you don't get confused. 8, 10, 12, drag, drop, right? Multiply, snap it into place, close it. So do that same operation for the other couple. Okay. Close. AV. Right. Multiply. Down. And the last one here. Okay. Now, of course, like one of the side effects of me building the site model like that is like the site model itself casts shadows, which in most other cases shouldn't be like that. Like you wouldn't have this. You'd have kind of a longer unbroken plane or a flatter plane anyways. So this would be a little less visually distracting. Ideally, you kind of don't want all of that stuff. Okay. That being said, that also allows me to kind of like change these all together, right? And so if I don't want to do multiply, I can kind of try some of the other blending modes and or kind of basically like play with the opacity, right? Or the fill with all 5 or 6 kind of sections all together, right? But I'm just kind of looking for a good balance of dark and just to get it so like, oh, I can kind of generally read, right, the shadows as they go along, right? And that's kind of like why, in certain cases, it might be nice to kind of have the sun path in here in a diagram like this, just so you say, okay, I am looking at, well, 8, 10, 12, 2, 4, 6 p.m., all this sort of stuff. But this is the composite, and this is what you save, okay? I'm sure there are actually kind of other ways to do this blending. You could probably try some of these other blending modes or actually just like straight up change the opacity with a full kind of normal uh mode, right? But then in those cases, like opacity for many of these probably have to get a lot lower, right, for everything to kind of come through. So I tend to do one of these essentially, right? Okay. and then just, save as, export this as JPEG or something, right? So JPEG, same export, and that would be the composite. So this is so here, shadow test 2, called it. So I should get the composite JPEG like that. Okay, I think that's it. Covers all of that. And then, yeah, that's it. Just to go directly to the items that the lab assignment requires.